The diplomatic station called Valanthos Prime floated in the empty darkness between 3 star systems. And it was the most beautiful thing Sergeant Marcus Cole had ever seen in his 32 years of life. He stood at the observation window of the human transport ship, watching as the massive structure grew larger and larger in the viewport, and he could not help but feel small in its presence. The station was ancient, built by species that had mastered space travel when humans were still living in caves and hunting with sharpened stones. And every curve of its design spoke of power and wealth that humanity could barely imagine. "First time seeing it?" asked Private Chun, stepping up beside him with a slight smile on her young face. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the station. He had served in the military for 14 years, had fought in the brutal fringe wars against pirates and raiders, had seen things that still haunted his dreams. But nothing had prepared him for the sheer scale of galactic civilization. "Makes you feel pretty small, doesn't it?" Chun said quietly. "We are small," Marcus replied, his voice calm and even. "Humanity has been in space for barely 100 years. And these species have been building empires for thousands of generations, before our ancestors discovered fire." The transport ship docked with a gentle thud, and Marcus gathered his equipment with practiced efficiency. He checked his pulse rifle, adjusted his shield generator, and made sure his armor was sealed properly, because even on a peaceful diplomatic mission, a soldier never let his guard down. The human delegation was small, just Ambassador Wei and her staff of diplomats, protected by a security team of 12 soldiers. They were here for trade negotiations, trying to secure better deals for Earth's colonies, and Marcus knew that every species on the station would be watching them with curious or contemptuous eyes. Ambassador Wei was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she addressed the security team before they disembarked. "Remember, we are guests here, and humanity's reputation depends on our behavior. Be professional, be respectful, and do not respond to any provocations." Marcus understood her meaning perfectly. Humans were the newcomers to the galactic stage, the primitive apes who had somehow stumbled into space, and many alien species looked down on them with barely concealed disgust. The soldiers had been warned to expect insults and mockery, and they had been ordered to endure it all with silent dignity. They stepped onto the station, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The main concourse was enormous, filled with hundreds of alien species walking and floating and slithering past each other, and the architecture was designed to make visitors feel tiny and insignificant. Towering pillars of crystal rose toward a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity, and holographic displays showed news and advertisements in dozens of languages that Marcus could not understand. The human delegation moved through the crowds, drawing stares and whispers from the aliens around them. Marcus kept his face blank and his posture straight, ignoring the pointed fingers and the mocking laughter that followed them like a shadow. Then the Volanthi arrived, and everything else seemed to fade into the background. They came in a procession of light and color. Tall and graceful beings with skin that glowed softly in shades of blue and purple. And they moved with the absolute confidence of a species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their robes were made of materials that shifted and flowed like living water, and their eyes were large and luminous, filled with ancient wisdom and casual arrogance. At the head of the procession walked the High Regent Velthon himself, the ruler of the Volanthi Empire and one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. And beside him walked a younger female who could only be his daughter. She was beautiful in the way that a distant star is beautiful, cold and brilliant and utterly untouchable, and she carried herself with the pride of royalty that had never known doubt or failure. Princess Solara Velthon was 19 years old by Volanthi counting, which made her a young adult by their standards, and she had spent her entire life surrounded by luxury and power. She had studied dozens of alien species in her education, learning their weaknesses and their uses, and she had developed strong opinions about which species deserved respect and which deserved only pity. Her eyes found the human soldiers, and her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth at all. "Father," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the concourse because she wanted to be heard. "Look at the humans with their little metal shells. Is it not amusing?" The High Regent glanced at the human delegation, but said nothing. His expression unreadable. Selar continued, speaking to her entourage, but keeping her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I studied them in my xenobiology courses, you know. They are classified as Category 7, which means persistence predators, primitive but adaptable. Their bodies are so fragile that they must wrap themselves in armor just to survive, and even then they break so easily." Marcus heard every word, and he felt his fellow soldiers tense beside him. Private Chun's hand tightened on her rifle, and Corporal Davis made a low sound of anger in his throat, but Marcus remained perfectly still, his face showing nothing at all. "They have no natural weapons," Selar went on, clearly enjoying herself. "No claws, no venom, no psychic abilities, no armor plating. Just soft skin and brittle bones and those ridiculous shields they carry because their own bodies cannot protect them. How do they not die of shame?" One of her attendants laughed, a musical sound that was somehow cruel. "Perhaps they do not know any better, Your Highness. They are still so young as a species, barely out of their caves." "That must be it," Selara agreed with a nod. "They simply do not understand how pathetic they appear to the rest of the galaxy. Someone should tell them, but I suppose it would be like explaining colors to a blind creature." Marcus felt the eyes of his team on him, waiting for his response, waiting for him to defend their species or at least show some reaction to the princess's words. But he simply raised one hand in a subtle gesture that meant stand down and stay calm, because he had heard worse insults in his years of service, and he knew that words could not hurt him unless he allowed them to. The princess noticed his lack of reaction, and something flickered in her luminous eyes, perhaps disappointment that her prey refused to take the bait. She turned away with a dismissive flick of her hand. Leading her entourage toward the diplomatic chambers, Ambassador Wei appeared beside Marcus, her voice low. "Thank you for your restraint, Sergeant. I know that was not easy." "It does not matter what they think of us," Marcus replied quietly. "We know who we are and what we can do, and one day, so will they." The ambassador nodded and moved on, and Marcus returned to his duties, watching the crowds and keeping his team alert. The negotiations would begin tomorrow, and until then, they had nothing to do but wait and endure the stares of species who saw them as little more than clever animals. But 3 hours later, everything changed. The alarm came without warning, a screaming siren that echoed through every corridor of the station, and the holographic displays flickered and changed to show emergency warnings in every known language. The crowds began to panic, aliens pushing and shoving as they tried to understand what was happening. Marcus grabbed his rifle and gathered his team with quick, sharp commands. "Form up on the ambassador, defensive formation, weapons ready." A station official appeared on the screens, his face pale with terror. "All personnel evacuate immediately. There has been a containment breach in the lower sectors. Repeat, containment breach. The Hollowed have been released." Marcus did not know what the Hollowed were, but he saw the reaction of every alien around him, and that told him everything he needed to know. The ancient species, the proud warriors, the arrogant nobles, they all wore the same expression of absolute horror. Something very bad had just woken up, and it was coming for them all. The screaming started in the lower levels and spread upward like a wave of pure terror, and Marcus could hear it even through the thick walls of the diplomatic wing. It was not the screaming of fear alone, but something worse, something that spoke of pain beyond imagination and horrors that the mind could not accept. A Volanti official rushed into the room where the human delegation had gathered, his bioluminescent skin flickering with panic. "You must evacuate now. The Hollowed are spreading faster than we anticipated. We cannot contain them." Ambassador Wei stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. "What are the Hollowed? What are we dealing with?" The official's large eyes were wild with terror. This station was built on top of an ancient prison, a place where our ancestors sealed away a parasitic species that nearly destroyed the galaxy 40,000 years ago. They are mindless creatures that consume organic matter and use the bodies of their victims as puppets. They feel no pain, they have no vital organs, and when you kill one, the pieces simply become more of them. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had fought many enemies in his career, but nothing like what the official was describing. "How do we kill them?" he asked sharply. The official shook his head in despair. "You cannot. Not really. Energy weapons burn them, but they regenerate. Projectile weapons tear them apart, but the pieces keep moving. The only way our ancestors stopped them was to seal them away in stasis fields, and those fields have failed." More alarms blared through the station, and the lights flickered as something in the lower levels damaged the power systems. The official turned and ran without another word, his terror greater than his duty. Captain Torres, the commander of the human security team, made quick decisions. "We need to get the ambassador to the evacuation shuttles. Everyone form up, standard protective formation." They moved through the corridors as a unit, 12 soldiers surrounding the ambassador and her staff, and Marcus took point position because he had the most combat experience. The hallways were filled with panicking aliens, all pushing toward the upper levels where the escape ships waited, and several times Marcus had to force a path through the crowd. They reached the shuttle bay after 20 minutes of hard travel, and Marcus felt a moment of relief when he saw the human evacuation ship waiting for them. Ambassador Wei and her staff boarded quickly, and Captain Torres began counting heads to make sure everyone was present. Then, a message came through on the emergency channel, and everything changed. "This is station security calling all available personnel," a desperate voice announced. "We have survivors trapped in Atrium 7 on level 12. The Hollowed have surrounded their position. We need immediate rescue." Another voice cut in, shaky with fear. "This is the Volanthi Royal Guard. Princess Salara Velthon is among the trapped survivors. Repeat, the princess is in Atrium 7. Marcus looked at Captain Torres, and he could see the calculation in his commander's eyes. The princess was not their responsibility, and the human delegation was already safe. By every rule of diplomacy and military protocol, they had no obligation to risk their lives for a Volanthi royal who had mocked them just hours ago. "The Volanthi can rescue their own princess," Torres said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The security channel crackled again. "All Volanthi rescue teams are committed to protecting the High Regent's evacuation. We cannot spare anyone for Atrium 7. Those survivors are on their own." Marcus thought about the princess and her cruel words, her laughter at human weakness, her contempt for his species. He thought about how easy it would be to simply board the shuttle and leave her to her fate, and no one would blame him for it. But then, he thought about something else. Something his father had told him many years ago, when Marcus was just a boy asking why humans always helped others, even when they got nothing in return. "Because that is who we are," his father had said. "We are not kind because others deserve it. We are kind because we choose to be, and that choice is what makes us human." Marcus stepped away from the shuttle. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Torres demanded. "Someone has to help them," Marcus replied, checking his rifle and making sure his shield generator was fully charged. "Those are people trapped down there, Captain. It does not matter what species they are or what they think of us." Torres stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see the conflict in his eyes. The captain wanted to order him back, wanted to keep his team together and safe. But something in Marcus's words had struck a chord. "You will be going alone," Torres finally said. "I cannot order anyone else to go with you, and I cannot leave the ambassador without full protection. I understand. The Hollowed are between you and that Atrium. Sergeant, you will have to fight through them alone. The chances of survival are—" "I know the chances, sir." Torres reached out and gripped Marcus's shoulder. "Then go, and may whatever gods watch over humans keep you safe. We do not leave people behind, Cole. Not even people who do not want our help." Marcus nodded once and turned away from the shuttle, walking back into the corridors that everyone else was fleeing. Behind him, he heard Private Chun call out his name, her voice thick with emotion. But he did not look back because looking back would make it harder to keep going. The corridors grew darker as he descended toward level 12. The emergency lights casting red shadows on the walls, and the screams grew louder with every step. He passed bodies on the floor. Aliens of species he did not recognize, their forms twisted and broken by whatever had attacked them. Then he saw his first Hollowed, and he understood why the galaxy feared them. It had once been a Volante, tall and graceful, but now it was something else entirely. Its body moved in ways that no living thing should move, joints bending in wrong directions, head twisted at an impossible angle, and its glowing skin had turned a sickly gray color. Worst of all were its eyes, empty and dark, showing nothing but hunger. It saw Marcus and let out a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a laugh. A terrible noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it rushed toward him with horrifying speed. Marcus raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into its chest. The plasma bolts burned through its body, leaving smoking holes where its vital organs should have been. But it did not stop. It did not even slow down. He dove to the side as it lunged, rolled to his feet, and fired again, this time aiming for its legs. The creature stumbled and fell, but it immediately began crawling toward him, its ruined legs dragging behind it. Marcus backed away slowly, his mind racing. The official had said they could not be killed, but there had to be a way to stop them, at least temporarily. He noticed that when he destroyed enough of its body, it moved slower, and that gave him an idea. He fired at its arms, then its spine, then its head, and by the time he was done, the Hollowed was nothing but scattered pieces on the floor. The pieces still twitched and tried to move toward him, but they were too small to be dangerous, at least for now. He did not have time to feel relieved. More shapes were moving in the darkness ahead, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and they had all heard the sound of his weapon. Marcus took a deep breath, checked his ammunition, and started walking. He could not run. Running would waste his energy and make him careless. He could not hide. There was nowhere safe on this level anymore. All he could do was move forward, fight through everything in his path, and reach those survivors before it was too late. The Hollowed came at him in waves, and Marcus fought them with everything he had. He shot the ones in front, used his knife on the ones that got too close, and kicked the pieces away when they tried to grab his ankles. His armor took hits that would have killed an unprotected human, and his shield generator flared again and again as claws and teeth scraped against the energy barrier. He took wounds. A claw got through his defense and opened a gash on his arm. A Hollowed tackled him and bit through his armor at the ribs before he could throw it off. Something sharp caught his leg and left a trail of blood behind him as he walked. But he did not stop. His armor's medical system pumped drugs into his bloodstream, chemicals that dulled the pain and kept him alert. And his body responded the way human bodies had always responded to danger. His heart pounded, his muscles flooded with adrenaline, and his mind became sharp and clear with the terrible focus of a predator on the hunt. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the toughest or the most powerful. But they were the ones who did not stop, the ones who kept going when any sane creature would have given up. And Marcus Cole proved that truth with every bloody step toward Atrium 7. Inside Atrium 7, Princess Elara Velthan pressed herself against the far wall and tried to control her breathing. She had never known true fear before this day, had never understood what it meant to be helpless, and now she could not stop her hands from shaking. There were 12 survivors in the atrium, all of them Valanthi nobles and diplomats who had been attending a private reception when the alarms began. They had sealed the doors and activated the emergency barriers, but everyone knew that the barriers would not hold forever. Through the security cameras mounted on the walls, they could see the hollowed gathering outside, dozens of twisted shapes pressing against the doors and scratching at the windows. The sound of their claws on metal was a constant screaming noise that seemed to drill into Selara's skull. Her personal guard had died getting her to this room. 4 brave Valanthi warriors who had given their lives to protect her, and she had watched them fall one by one, their bodies taken by the parasites even as they still breathed. She would never forget the look in Captain Thren's eyes as the hollow dragged him away, still fighting, still trying to protect her even as the darkness consumed him. "We must do something," said Lord Varan, an elderly noble whose bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing from stress and fear. "We cannot simply wait here to die. The royal guard will come for us," another noble insisted, but his voice held no conviction. The High Regent would never abandon his daughter. Selara knew the truth, and it burned in her chest like acid. She had managed to contact the Royal Guard channel, and she had heard the response that still echoed in her mind. Her father's forces were protecting him and him alone, and there was no one coming to rescue her. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. One of the younger nobles, a female named Lyris, who served as a diplomatic aide, was monitoring the security feeds and suddenly gasped. "There is someone coming!" Everyone rushed to look at the display, expecting to see Valanthi soldiers in gleaming armor, but what they saw made them freeze in confusion. A single figure was moving through the corridor toward the atrium, and it was not Valanthi. It was human, one of the small soft creatures that Selara had mocked just hours ago, and he was fighting his way through a sea of hollowed with nothing but a rifle and desperate courage. "That is impossible," Lord Varan whispered. "One human against all those monsters. He will be torn apart in seconds." But seconds passed, and the human did not fall. They watched in stunned silence as he moved through the horde, shooting and stabbing and kicking, taking hits that should have killed him but somehow staying on his feet. His armor was covered in ichor and blood, some of it clearly his own, but he kept moving forward like a machine that did not know how to stop. Selara recognized him. He was the sergeant from the human delegation, the one who had stood so still and silent while she mocked his species. She had thought his lack of reaction was weakness, proof that humans were too timid to defend themselves. But now she saw something different in his movements, something that made her ancient instincts scream in warning. He fought like something from the old stories, the tales that Valanthi mothers told their children to make them behave. He fought like the monsters that had hunted in the darkness of primitive worlds, the ones that never stopped chasing, never stopped hunting, until their prey simply collapsed from exhaustion. "He is not retreating," Lyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "He takes damage, and he just keeps coming." "What kind of creature does that?" "A human," Selara heard herself say, and the word tasted different in her mouth now, heavier somehow, more meaningful. The sergeant reached the sealed doors of the atrium, and for a terrible moment, the survivors thought he would simply pound on the metal and beg to be let in. Instead, he turned his back to the door and faced the hollowed, holding them off while he reached for something on his belt. It was a plasma torch, and he began cutting through the door behind him while still fighting the creatures in front. Selara could not understand how that was possible, how anyone could divide their attention like that in the middle of combat, but the human did it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She watched him take a blow to the chest that cracked his armor plate, saw him stumble and nearly fall, and felt her heart stop in her throat. But then he planted his feet and kept cutting, kept fighting, and she realized that he would not stop until he was dead or the door was open. Something inside her shifted. Some wall that she had built around her heart from years of being told that humans were lesser creatures. This was not weakness she was seeing. This was strength of a kind she had never imagined. Selara grabbed a communication device and connected to the station's emergency frequency. "This is Princess Selara Velthon calling for support. There is a human soldier at Atrium 7. He is trying to rescue us. Send him help immediately." The response came back cold and bureaucratic. "All Valanti forces are assigned to royal evacuation protocols. Human military personnel are not our responsibility. They operate outside our chain of command. He is saving our lives." Selara shouted into the device. "Does that mean nothing to you?" "Our orders are clear, Your Highness. We cannot divert resources for non-Valanti personnel." She threw the device against the wall, shattering it, and turned back to the security feed. The human was still there, still fighting, and his movements were growing slower as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. How much more could one body endure? A hollowed managed to get behind him and drove its claws into his shoulder. He screamed, a raw sound of pure pain, but he did not stop cutting. He simply reached back with his knife and stabbed the creature until it fell away, then returned to his work. "The door," someone called out. "He is almost through the door." The plasma torch had cut a rough circle in the metal, and the human was kicking at it now, trying to knock it loose while keeping the hollowed at bay. It was an impossible task, and yet somehow he was doing it. The metal fell inward with a crash, and the human soldier stumbled through the opening, immediately turning to fire at the creatures trying to follow. His rifle clicked empty, and he drew his sidearm instead, holding the doorway with grim determination. "Help me seal this," he shouted, his voice rough with pain. "We need to barricade the opening." The Valanti nobles stared at him in shock, frozen by the sight of this bloody, broken human who had walked through hell to save them. He was supposed to be weak, supposed to be inferior, but here he stood, still fighting while they cowered. Selara was the first to move. She grabbed a heavy table and began dragging it toward the door, and her actions seemed to wake the others from their trance. Within moments, everyone was working together, piling furniture against the opening while the human held off the hollowed. When the barricade was secure enough to hold for a few minutes, the sergeant finally stepped back, and Selara got her first clear look at him. His armor was torn in a dozen places. Blood seeped from wounds on his arm and leg and shoulder, and one of his eyes was swollen shut from a blow to the face. He looked like he should be dead, and yet he was already scanning the room, already planning his next move. "How many survivors?" he asked, his voice steady despite everything. 12, Selara answered. 3 are wounded badly. He nodded and moved to check on the wounded, his medical training taking over even as his own blood dripped onto the floor. Selara followed him, unable to look away, unable to understand this creature that refused to acknowledge its own damage. "Why?" she asked suddenly, and the word came out before she could stop it. "Why did you come for us? We are not your people. I was cruel to you, and your superiors did not order this. Why would you risk your life for us?" The human looked at her with his one good eye, and there was no anger in his gaze, no resentment for the words she had spoken earlier. There was only exhaustion and pain and something deeper, something that looked almost like compassion. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That is all the reason I need." The barricade shuddered as the hollowed threw themselves against it, and Selara realized that their moment of safety was almost over. The human checked his sidearm, counting the remaining shots, and she saw his jaw tighten when he found the number too low. They were trapped, running out of time, and this human who owed them nothing was preparing to die defending them. Solara did not know what to feel anymore, but she knew that whatever happened next, she would never forget this moment. "They will break through soon," the sergeant said calmly. "We need to prepare." Sergeant Marcus Cole stood in the center of Atrium 7 and assessed their situation with the cold clarity of a soldier who had accepted that death was coming. The room had one real choke point, the hole he had cut in the door, and if they could hold that position, they might survive long enough for someone to reach them. "Everyone who can move, I need you to help me build a real barricade," he announced, his voice cutting through the fear like a blade. "We stack everything heavy in front of that door. We leave only enough space for one hollow to come through at a time, and we make them pay for every inch." The Volanthi nobles hesitated, looking at each other with uncertainty. They had servants for manual labor, and most of them had never lifted anything heavier than a drinking glass in their lives. Now, Marcus barked, and something in his tone made them jump to obey. These were beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, but in this moment, they followed the orders of a human without question. Princess Solara worked beside him, her elegant hands scraping against rough metal as they dragged furniture and debris into position. She did not complain about the dirt or the damage to her robes, and Marcus found himself surprised by her willingness to help. "You have done this before," she said as they worked. "You have been trapped and surrounded and faced death. I can see it in your eyes. Many times," Marcus admitted. "Humans have a saying, what does not kill us makes us stronger. We have been fighting for survival since our species was born, and every generation teaches the next how to endure. On my world, we are taught that combat is something for the lower castes to handle. Nobility should never dirty themselves with such things. And how is that working out for you tonight?" She was silent for a moment, then let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Not well, I admit." The barricade took shape quickly, a wall of tables and chairs and decorative panels that would funnel the hollowed into a narrow killing zone. Marcus positioned himself at the center, checked his weapons one more time, and prepared for the final battle. The hollowed hit the barricade with a sound like thunder, and the fighting began. Marcus fired his sidearm with careful precision, making every shot count, aiming for heads and spines to slow the creatures down. Beside him, Lord Varan had picked up a metal rod and was swinging it at anything that got too close, his ancient face twisted with rage and fear. "There are too many," Lyris screamed. "They just keep coming?" She was right. For every hollowed that Marcus put down, 3 more pushed through the opening, and his ammunition was running out fast. He could feel his body weakening as blood continued to seep from his wounds, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges. His sidearm clicked empty, and he did not have time to reload. A hollowed lunged at him, and he caught it with his bare hands, wrestling with the creature as its claws scraped against his cracked armor. He threw it aside and grabbed his knife, slashing at the next one while kicking another away from the wounded nobles behind him. Then his shield generator began to spark and flicker, damaged by the constant abuse it had taken during his journey through the station. The energy barrier that had protected him from dozens of killing blows was failing, and without it, he was just a man with a knife against an army of monsters. Princess Solara saw the shield failing and felt something cold grip her heart. "Your protection is breaking," she called out. "You must retreat. You must save yourself." Marcus did not retreat. Instead, he reached down and ripped the damaged shield generator from his belt, throwing it aside like garbage. The Volanthi stared at him in horror, unable to understand what he was doing. "What are you doing?" Solara demanded. "Without your shield, you have nothing. Your soft human body cannot survive against them." Marcus turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Something ancient and terrible and utterly without fear. When he spoke, his voice was different, deeper, and rougher. like something that had climbed up from the darkness of human evolution. "The shield was never for me," he said. "It was for them." Then he stepped forward into the mass of hollowed, and Solara understood what he meant. Without the shield, without the armor holding him back, Marcus fought like nothing she had ever seen. He was not elegant or graceful or refined. He was brutal and savage and relentless, a creature of pure violence that tore through the hollowed with his bare hands and teeth when his knife was knocked away. He took wounds that should have killed him. Claws ripped through his chest, teeth sank into his shoulder, and something carved a gash across his face that would leave a scar forever. But he did not stop, did not slow, did not show any sign of pain. Instead, he snarled and growled and fought harder, using the bodies of fallen hollowed as weapons against the living ones, ripping and tearing with a ferocity that made the ancient parasites hesitate for the first time in 40,000 years. Solara watched in awe and terror as the human soldier became something else, something that her xenobiology courses had never prepared her for. This was not the soft or fragile creature she had mocked. This was a predator, a hunter, a thing that her genetic memory recognized and feared on a level deeper than thought. "Persistence predators," she whispered, remembering the term from her studies. "They are persistence predators." She had thought it meant they were stubborn, that they simply did not know when to give up. But now she understood the true meaning. Humans were the descendants of creatures that had hunted by following their prey for days without rest, running them down through sheer endurance until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They were built to absorb damage and keep going, to ignore pain and injury and fear, to become more dangerous the longer a fight lasted. The hollowed were facing something they had never encountered in all their millennia of existence. Prey that would not run, would not hide, would not stop fighting no matter how much damage they took. And for the first time, the mindless parasites seemed confused, hesitating at the edges of the battle. Marcus stood in a pile of broken hollowed bodies, covered in ichor and blood, swaying on his feet but still standing. His knife had been found again, clutched in a hand that was more red than flesh-colored, and his one good eye swept across the horde with the calm assessment of a hunter counting the remaining prey. "Come on," he growled, his voice barely human anymore. "I have been chasing things like you since my ancestors lived in caves. Do you think I am going to stop now?" The hollowed surged forward again, but something had changed. They were not fighting with the same mindless aggression anymore. They were cautious, wary, and some of them even tried to retreat from the blood-soaked monster that had once been a quiet human soldier. Solara made a decision. She grabbed the metal pole from the barricade and stepped up beside Marcus, her fear giving way to something that felt almost like exhilaration. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, never taking his eyes off the enemy. "Standing with you," she replied. "I am tired of being helpless. I'm tired of watching others die for me. If this is my end, I will face it fighting." He looked at her for a moment, and despite everything, despite the blood and the pain and the death all around them, he smiled. "Then stay close and watch my back." They fought together, the human soldier and the alien princess, two creatures from different worlds united by desperation and courage. Solara was clumsy and untrained, but she made up for it with determination, blocking attacks that would have hit Marcus from behind and driving back hollowed that tried to flank them. The other survivors found their courage as well. Lord Varan rallied the able-bodied nobles, and soon a line of Volantes stood beside the human, fighting with improvised weapons and raw terror. They were not warriors, but they were not cowards either, not anymore. Time lost all meaning in the chaos of battle. Minutes felt like hours, and every moment brought new wounds, new exhaustion, new reasons to give up. But Marcus kept standing, kept fighting, kept holding the line, and as long as he stood, the others refused to fall. Finally, after an eternity of violence, the Hollowed began to pull back. There were not many of them left in this section, and whatever passed for survival instinct in their parasitic minds was telling them to find easier prey elsewhere. Marcus watched them retreat into the darkness of the corridor, his body finally beginning to feel the full weight of everything he had endured. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, and every wound was screaming for attention. He turned to check on the survivors and found them staring at him with expressions he could not read. Fear, certainly, but also something else, something that looked almost like reverence. "Is everyone alive?" he asked, and his voice came out as barely a whisper. "We are alive," Salara answered. "Because of you." His legs gave out beneath him, and he sat down hard against the barricade, no longer able to stand. His vision was going dark at the edges, and he knew that he was going into shock from blood loss. "Just hold on a little longer," Salara said, kneeling beside him. "Help will come. It has to come. Make sure everyone stays behind the barricade," Marcus managed to say. "The Hollowed might come back." He closed his one good eye just for a moment, just to rest. But he kept his knife in his hand because a soldier never truly stopped fighting until the battle was over. Salara stayed beside him, watching over the human who had given everything to save people who... The Volanthi rescue teams arrived 20 minutes after the last Hollowed retreated, and they came expecting to find nothing but corpses. The creatures had overrun dozens of sections on level 12. And every other group of trapped survivors had been lost to the swarm. But when they broke through the barricade at Atrium 7, they found something that would be talked about for generations. 12 Volanthi nobles stood in a defensive formation around a pile of destroyed Hollowed, armed with metal rods and broken furniture. Their elegant robes stained with ichor, and their eyes wild with the look of survivors who had seen the face of death and refused to look away. And at the center of it all, sitting against the barricade with a knife still clutched in his bloody hand, was a human soldier who should have died a dozen times over. The rescue team leader, a veteran warrior named Commander Thalas, stood frozen in the doorway as he tried to understand what he was seeing. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Who killed all these Hollowed?" Princess Salara stepped forward, and her voice carried the steel of someone who had been forever changed by the night's events. "He did. This human walked alone through the infested corridors, fought his way to us, and held the line while your forces were busy protecting my father. He saved our lives when no one else would." Commander Thalas looked at the human with new eyes, taking in the catastrophic injuries, the blood loss that should have been fatal, the determination that still burned in that one remaining good eye. "How is he still alive?" "He whispered, because he refused to die," Salara answered simply. "That is what humans do." The medical teams rushed in, Volanthi doctors who had never treated a human before, and had to rely on their universal medical scanners to figure out what to do. They were baffled by what they found. "His system is flooded with shock hormones and combat chemicals," one doctor reported. "His bones have microfractures in 7 locations. He has lost enough blood to kill 3 Volanthi. His pain receptor should have overloaded and shut down hours ago." "How is he conscious?" A human medic from the evacuation shuttle pushed through the crowd, a young woman who had insisted on being brought to help when she heard that Sergeant Cole had been found. She looked at the readings and shook her head. "Adrenaline and pure stubbornness," she said with a sad smile. "Humans do not die easy when we have someone to protect. Our bodies can keep going long past what should be possible when the alternative is letting innocent people die." They stabilized Marcus as best they could and rushed him to the station's medical bay, where the best doctors from a dozen species worked to save his life. For 12 hours, his survival was uncertain, his heart stopping twice before the doctors managed to restart it. But he survived, because of course he did. Humans did not give up, not even against death itself. The news spread across the station within hours, and from the station, it spread across the galaxy. every species that had a representative at Valantos. Prime heard the story of the human soldier who had walked alone into a hollowed infestation to save people who had mocked him. And the reactions were not what anyone expected. For thousands of years, the galaxy had dismissed humans as a young and primitive species, clever animals who had stumbled into space before they were truly ready. They were tolerated because they were useful, traded with because they were adaptable, but never respected because they were soft and fragile and weak. But this story challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew. The security footage from Atrium 7 was leaked within days, and it showed everything. It showed Marcus cutting through the door while fighting off Hollow behind him. It showed him building a barricade while bleeding from wounds that would have incapacitated any other species. It showed him ripping off his shield and becoming something else, something that made even hardened warriors shudder when they watched. Xenobiologists rewrote their textbooks. The classification of humans changed from Category 7, persistence predators, primitive, but adaptable, to something much longer and more complicated, full of warnings about never underestimating human endurance or assuming that a wounded human was no longer dangerous. Military strategists across the galaxy began revising their plans. If one human soldier could do this alone, what could an entire human army do if they were pushed too far? The implications were terrifying. 3 weeks after the incident, the High Regent himself came to the medical bay where Marcus was recovering. No human had ever been addressed directly by the ruler of the Valanthi Empire, and the medical staff cleared the room so they could speak in private. The High Regent was ancient, his bioluminescence dimmed by centuries of life, but his eyes were sharp and knowing. He stood at the foot of Marcus's bed and studied the human for a long moment. "My daughter told me what you did," he said finally. "She told me that you saved her life and the lives of 11 others when my own forces abandoned them. She told me that you did this knowing that we had mocked you, that we had dismissed your species as inferior, that we had given you every reason to leave us to our fate." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I did what any soldier would do, Your Highness." "No," the High Regent replied. "You did what a human soldier would do. I have lived for 600 years. I have never seen another species sacrifice themselves for strangers the way your kind does. I thought it was foolishness, a weakness born from primitive pack instincts. But I was wrong." He placed his hand over his chest in the ancient Valanthi gesture of life debt, a symbol that had not been offered to any non-Valanthi in 3,000 years. "I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid, Sergeant Cole. My daughter is alive because of you, and my empire is forever in your service." Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Your Highness. I hope this can be the start of better understanding between our peoples." The High Regent smiled, the expression strange on his alien features. "It already is. Celara has not stopped talking about humans since that night. She has made it her personal mission to ensure that the Valanthi Empire treats your species with the respect you deserve." Princess Celara visited him every day during his recovery, and their conversations were nothing like their first meeting. She asked questions about human history, human culture, human evolution, and she listened to his answers with genuine fascination. "I still do not fully understand," she admitted one afternoon, sitting in a chair beside his bed. "You are physically weaker than us. You live shorter lives. You have no natural weapons or defenses. How did your species survive long enough to reach the stars?" Marcus thought about the question for a while before answering. "Humans are weak alone, but we are never alone. We survived because we protect each other, even when it cost us everything. We survived because we refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat is the logical outcome. We survived because somewhere in our evolution, we decided that giving up was not an option. But that night, you were alone," Salar pointed out. "No other humans came to help you." "I was not alone," Marcus replied with a slight smile. Every human who ever lived was with me. Every ancestor who fought against impossible odds. Every soldier who held the line when hope was lost. Every mother who protected her children against predators stronger than herself. I carry them all inside me, and they do not let me fall. Solara was silent for a long time, processing his words. Finally, she said something that surprised him. I think I was wrong about your shields, about the armor you wear. I said it was a sign of weakness, that you hide because you are afraid. But that is not true, is it? No, a shield is not for you. It is for everyone else. You wear it to hold yourselves back, to keep the thing I saw that night contained. Without the shield, without the armor, humans are something older, something dangerous, something that frightens even you. Marcus met her eyes and nodded slowly. We spent millions of years as predators, as hunters, as things that killed to survive. Civilization is new for us, just a few thousand years old, and the instincts are still there beneath the surface. The armor and the shields help us stay human, help us remember that we are not just killers anymore. Solara leaned back in her chair and whispered, "They are not soft. They are sheathed." What? Something I realized while I watched you fight. Humans are not the weak, fragile creatures we thought you were. You are blades, deadly and sharp, but you choose to keep yourselves sheathed because you do not want to hurt others. The softness is not weakness. It is mercy. Months later, Solara stood before the Volanti Grand Council, the youngest person ever to address that ancient body, and she spoke about humans with passion and conviction. We have underestimated them for too long, she declared. We looked at their short lives and their fragile bodies and assumed they were lesser beings. But they are not lesser. They are different, and that difference makes them valuable allies and terrible enemies. The council members murmured among themselves, and one elderly noble raised an objection. They are still primitive, Your Highness. They have been in space for barely a century. What can they possibly offer the Volanti Empire? Solara smiled, and there was steel in her expression. They offer something no other species can. They offer the willingness to walk into hell for people they have never met. They offer the refusal to abandon allies, even when abandonment would be safer.